Hello everyone, a warm welcome to this virtual training series on Microsoft 365 Mobility and Security MS 101. I'm Monica from TechnoFocus and I will be serving as your moderator today. We're glad to have Johan Nickel with us, who will be presenting today's session. He is a certified Microsoft 365 trainer and passionate senior cloud solution architect with great experience in developing and integrating applications with Azure Active Directory. He is currently based in Switzerland. If you happen to face any audio or video issues during the webcast or have any technical questions, please post them in the Q&A panel and our team is here to help you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our presenter. Johan, you have the floor now.
Hi and welcome to the day 3 of the Microsoft 365 Mobility and Security MS 101.
Day 3. Okay, how we gonna structure day 3? We go through the main topic of implementing data loss prevention and sensitivity labels. We focus on the configuration of data loss prevention, DLP. We configure and manage DLP policies. We plan for sensitivity labels, and we create and publish sensitivity labels.
Okay, let's start the technical discussion about implementing data loss prevention and Azure information protection in this module. Let's start with the basic of information protection and the governance. The amount of electronic data being created by the organizations is growing in a massive way. So as the data volume expands and to stay compliant in this whole world with global regulations like General Data Protection Regulation GDPR, this adds a new layer of complexity. So many organizations are exposing themselves to unnecessary risk, including steep fines because they don't have a good inventory of all the data they have or adequate policies in place to protect it in specific. So quality data governance protects your and your customers' data across devices, apps and cloud services. So the first questions you need to ask yourself is, do you have specific compliance concerns? Do you have access issues or a growing volume of sensitive data, for example? Because every organization is really different. But every data governance strategy requires the following 4 points. An inventory of your data, policies to protect and maintain it, training to support the strategy, and at last, the monitoring and updates. So let's start with the first point, to build a comprehensive data inventory. To protect your data, you need really to know what you have by building a comprehensive data inventory that is accurately and it maps the flow of personal data across your entire business. You need to know answers to the following questions, for example. Are you dealing with sensitive employee or customer data or both? What kind of data do you have, and does any of it require special compliance measures, like an example, health or financial data? On the other hand, where is your data stored, and specifically who has access to this information and from what devices? Another question could be, do you have adequate access and identity control measures in place? Because this is a very important part, because the whole attack started on the identity in this world right now. So, and on the other hand, how long do you keep your data and why specifically? So the biggest drivers for data governance are compliance. There are numbers out like 61%. And on the other hand, the preventing of data losses with 51%. So this is a very important part, that you build up a comprehensive data inventory. The second important point is the implementation of data protection policies. Because data is created and shared across boundaries, devices like apps and cloud services. It's imperative that you protect the data throughout this complete life cycle and across your environment. This end-to-end data governance helps you specifically to find and retain the data that is most important, while eliminating redundant, obsolete, and trivial data that could cause risk of compromise. How you can do that? So you put in the automation. So automating the process is specifically the key to maintain compliance with your own policies as well as specific regulatory laws. Your data governance policies should include the following 3 points. First is the automatic classification, that you can classify data based on automatic analysis such as age, user, type, data sensitivity, and, for example, user provides a specific fingerprint. On the other hand, security. The employment of automated access control policies based on data classification helps you a lot to really specify who really needs the access to the information. And the third point is the data retention fact. So you need to implement policy recommendations based on machine learning or cloud intelligence to preserve high-value data in place and really purge what's redundant or trivial or obsolete. We have such a massive amount of data in the enterprise actually. On the other hand, you need really to go and energize your strategy. So after defining your data governance plan, you will want to make sure all affected people have a strong understanding of your privacy protection and governance policies. This is a really important point to implement such a strategy and to spray out all the information to the people that are involved in the processes, all your employees specifically. Because you may want to expand your corporate training significantly to help your employees, partners, suppliers, and vendors that they are being educated about the different policies and rules you follow in your organization. For example, you can build up internal webinars, workshops, online training courses, or provide specific reference materials to train your employees, partners, and vendors on policies. The last point is the monitoring, measurement, and update. So once you have done the work to create your data inventory, really employ a solid data governance policy and educate all involved. You need to plan, to monitor, measurement, and audit your strategy because you don't want to lose the whole work what you have done before. So dashboards, reporting, alerts will also help you to implement a plan and to be successful in your strategy. So let's dive a little bit deeper in knowing your data. And as you can see, we have 3 main questions here. The first one is what methods can I use to classify my data? For example, can I classify data manually, automatically? Can I recommend, for example, my classification to the user or to the employees itself? This is a main strategy what you need to see, or you need to answer this question, and specifically which methods you can do that to provide a good classification in your environment. On the other hand, where can I classify my data? There are different storage types, applications and everything in your organization. There are a lot of places where you can data live in a normal world. So what you need to see about that is which application really supports your classification software. And this is a main point, and see that a lot of vendors in the market don't spend a lot of effort to integrate classification in their strategy, in their product strategy. So you really need to see how you can work with classification of your data in the specific apps. And on the other hand is really need to see what happens to your data over the complete life cycle. In specific, if it comes that you work or export, for example, information of one system that gets classified, you will work with an application on your computer, for example, with Word or an Excel sheet, for example, and you put it back in the system itself or in another system. or what specifically happens if you share your data with external parties. Those are really three key questions you need to take a look in your strategy if you want to start with classification of data. Let's discuss also about more specific questions you need to keep in mind in the field of knowing your data. As I already mentioned, where is my sensitive data located? So you need to see, is it on a file server, is it on SharePoint, is it on SharePoint Online, is it in a mailbox, for example, or in any other document management system. So you have many places you need to keep care about where is really your sensitive data located and how it's moving around in the complete life cycle. So it will be exported or downloaded from a store to your client and will be uploaded back, or it's shared or anything. So on the other hand, what are the risky activities that are happening in my organization? There is a specific field where you need to take a real close look on it, and I will do that in the demonstration later on as well. So what's happened with the sharing of with external parties, and with which applications they work. Is the classification applying on the applications they use? And specific, after you classify your data, if you have a data leakage prevention strategy or an Azure information protection strategy applied on it, what happens if they come with a specific application on their site? The next question is, do you need to comply with a regulation? For example, where is my personal information stored? Where is it located? How is it processed? There's a lot of questions you need to answer to really know your data and where you need to go on with your strategy in that field. And then after that, how specifically you can control the data sprawl and build a strategy for dark data disposal. So before you bring data to the cloud from your on-premises world, so you need really to have a decision process, which information can be moved and which places it can be stored. And for this, really, it helps you to really invest at first in the knowledge of your data to get a great place for decisions later on. And the other point, what's always important, as I already mentioned as well, is how I really can see the activity around classification and labeling across retention and sensitive labels. This is specifically called to the Microsoft 365 world because these are two label parts in the strategy. So the first one is about retention, how long I need to hold the information, do I need to archive it, do I have special backup requirements, or on the other hand, the sensitivity labels that also can work with a later protection or DLP functionality on it. So you really need to see a whole process, and the Microsoft 365 world gives you a lot of insight of this information. So it shows you where your information is transferred, is it shared, is it protected, who is going to try to open the information, and there is a lot of things, of activities you really need to keep care about it and to define a strategy for this question in specific. And how do I monitor ongoing risk around the label activity? What does it mean for a specific? It can be do the following thing. Let's think about that. If I have an employee and he always say, okay, I want to send this information, and he classifies the information wrong to go around the whole DLP or information protection features. So this is really an important task, that you educate your users not to cheat yourself and to specifically monitor these activities in your environment later on. The good thing to know is that Microsoft really supports us with a unified data classification platform already. So we have the capabilities to have a consistent auto-classification across devices, apps and services. Let's just get an idea about that, we can use, for example, Cloud App Security to classify our information on SharePoint Online place, for example, on the OneDrive storage, on many other kinds. We can use the classification feature already in that place. We see the classification capabilities on our clients, that we have the auto classification on our clients itself. With the unified labeling platform, is it already integrated in our Office suite, so we can have really a native integration in the whole content pipeline, and we can do a lot of things with that. On the other hand, to support the auto classification, we need to have a great content scanning. And Microsoft already provides 90 plus built-in sensitive information types that help us to get really patterns to scan around in the data to identify sensitive information in your organization. On side of this 90 plus built-in sensitive information types, obviously you get chance to work with keywords, with regex patterns, or any other thing that you can do around with that. On the other hand, we have the full extensible scanning support for this specific sensitive information types around. We can scan on premises file servers, SharePoint servers. We can scan around in the whole cloud services ecosystem, what we run with Cloud App Security, for example. We have a complete integration in the productivity apps, in the Office apps itself, like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook. Now also with the Adobe Acrobat Reader, we have the capabilities to work in these applications natively with the classification framework. And obviously in Office 365, in the native integration in Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and newly obviously with Teams, we have a lot of possibilities to work with our classification parts, specific for retention labels, and on the other hand for sensitivity labels, that we can address all the different cases what we have in our organization. After discussing the first questions, what we really need to know about our data and a little bit of the introduction of data classification, we go through the data loss prevention section to get more and more insights about the functionality we need to know on the exam and for our practical work during our normal work hours. To comply with business standards and industry regulations, organizations must protect sensitive information and prevent its inadvertent disclosure. Sensitive information can include, for example, financial data or personally identifiable information, PII, such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, or, for example, health records. With a data loss prevention policy in Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, you can specifically identify, monitor, and automatically protect sensitive information across Office 365. In the presentation here we see on this slide the different capabilities what we get with Office 365 already. So in the last few months we get the integration into Microsoft Teams, and specific in chat messages, channel conversations. In Exchange Online we have already the email in transport, which means that we can use transport rules in Exchange Online, where we can go through the email body, attachments, and obviously we can include or exclude groups for that topic. We can do on SharePoint Online, for example, that we can see every files used in team sites. There are included or excluded sites what we can use for our different use cases what we need to do. And on the other hand, we have the integration in OneDrive for Business, which we can do the same things like for SharePoint in this specific manner. What we can use over the whole strategy is also policy tips. We can block sharing, We can allow user overrides if the user really is informed about the risk what we're gonna do with this task in this moment, and he can do an override to say, okay, I really want to send this email, I want or I need to share this email, and I'm aware about the risk. We can also work with notification emails, that if sensitive content is shared in our organization or beyond our organization, and we can get informed with notification emails. There are a lot of functionality. We go more and more deeper during this module. DLP policy basically contains a few things. Where to protect the content is defined in a location, such as Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for business sites, as well as Microsoft Teams chat and channel messages, as we already seen in the previous slides. The next thing is when and how to protect the contents by enforcing rules. You have the following things. You have conditions and actions. Conditions, the content, for example, must match before the rule is enforced. For example, a rule might be configured to look only for content containing social security numbers that's been shared with people outside your organization. This could be a condition. The other part, action, for example, that you want the rule to take automatically when content match happens in the condition before. So, for example, a rule might be configured to block access to a document and send both the user and compliance officer an email notification. This could be an action you can do with Microsoft 365 DLP policy. You can use a rule to meet a specific protection requirement as well, and then use a DLP policy to group together common protection requirements, like all of the rules needed to comply with a specific regulation, for example. On the other hand, you might have a DLP policy that helps you to detect the presence of information subject to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the HIPAA. In this case, the policy could help you protect HIPAA data across all the locations, like SharePoint online sites and all OneDrive for business sites, to find any documents that contains this information that's shared with people outside your organization, and then block access to the document and sending notifications. So if we see a little bit in detail, we can say, okay, the policy matches the HIPAA data, that's the specifically what. The where is the location, like here in my example, SharePoint online sites and OneDrive for business. And the condition could be that it's sent or shared outside to people outside your organization. That could be the condition. The action could be the blocking of the access to the document and sending a notification. So these are specific requirements that are stored as an individual rule and can be grouped together as a DLP policy to simplify your management and reporting capabilities. Let's talk a little bit more about the different parts of a data loss prevention policy, as we see in the figure. So a DLP policy basically can find and protect sensitive information across Office 365, whether the information is located in Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, or Microsoft Teams. You can choose to protect content in Exchange email, Microsoft Teams, chats and channel messages, and all SharePoint or OneDrive libraries, or select a specific location for a policy. For example, that you can only choose SharePoint sites and OneDrive accounts, or you want only to dig deeper into the Exchange email part. That could be a good decision to put allocations like this into place. So if you choose to include specific distribution groups in Exchange, the DLP policy will be scoped only to the members of that group. Similarly, excluding a distribution group will exclude all the members of that distribution group from policy evaluation. So this is another capability. You have to say an in and out scenario on that case. You can choose basically to scope a policy to the members of distribution lists, dynamic distribution groups, and security groups. Keep in mind, a DLP policy can contain no more than 50 such inclusions and exclusions. So on the other hand, we have the rules. Rules are what enforce your business requirements on your organization's content. So a policy contains one or more rules, and each rule consists of conditions and actions. So for each rule, when the conditions are met, the actions are taken automatically. Rules are executed sequentially, starting with the highest priority rule in each policy. Keep that in mind also for the exam. A rule also provides the options to notify users. We have two capabilities. The first one is policy tips, and the second one email notifications for users. For administrators, we have also the email incident reports, and where there is implemented the content that has matched in the rule for a specific. Conditions are also a very important part because they determine what types of information you're looking for. For example, you might choose to ignore content containing passport numbers unless the content contains more than 10 such numbers and is shared with people outside of your organization. Conditions are focusing on the content, such as what type of sensitive information you're looking for, and also the context, such as who the document is shared with. You can use conditions to assign different actions to different risk levels. Let's make an example. A sensitive content shared internally might be a lower risk and require fewer actions than sensitive content shared with people outside the organization. The conditions that are now available can do the following things for us. They can see the content contains a type of sensitive information, or the content contains a label, a specific label what we have put on the information itself. Or on the other hand, the content is shared with people outside or inside our organization. Now we can take a closer look to the types of sensitive information. A DLP policy can help you to protect sensitive information, which is defined as a sensitive information type in Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 includes definitions for many common sensitive information types across different regions that are ready for use, such as credit card numbers, bank account numbers, national ID numbers, and passport numbers. When a DLP policy looks for a sensitive information type, such a credit card number, it doesn't simply look for a 16-digit number. Each sensitive information type is defined and detected by using a combination of the following things. Keywords, an internal function to validate checksums or compositions, the evaluation of regular expressions to find pattern matches, and other content examinations. So this helps DLP detection to achieve a high degree of accuracy, while it's reducing the number of false positives that can interrupt people's work, for example. If a content matches a condition in a rule, you can apply actions to automatically protect the content, as you see in the figure on the slide. For example, restrict the access to the content. For site content, this means that permissions for the document are restricted for everyone except the primary site collection administrator, document owner, and person who last modified the document. These people can remove the sensitive information from the document or take other remedial actions. When the document is now in a compliant state, the original permissions are automatically restored. So when access to a document is blocked, the document appears with a special policy tip icon in the library on the site, as you can see in the slide. For email content, this action blocks the message from being sent. So depending on how the DLP rule is configured, the sender sees an NDR, or if the rule uses a notification, a policy tip and or email notification appears. Next we will see how we can work with user notifications and user overrides. We can use notifications and overrides to educate our users about DLP policies and help them remain compliant without blocking their work. For example, if a user tries to share a document containing sensitive information, a DLP policy can both send them an email notification and show them a policy tip in the context of the document library that allows them to override the policy if they have a business justification, for example. In the case of an email, you can notify the person who sent, shared or modified the content, and for the site content, the primary site collection administrator and document owner. So you can inform or notify these users in that case. But you are also able, in addition, to add or remove whomever you choose from the email notification. So that's also possible, obviously. In addition to sending an email notification, user notification displays a policy tip. It works in Outlook and Outlook on the web, or for the document on SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business site. It also works in, as I mentioned, in Excel, PowerPoint and Word, when the document is stored on a site included in a DLP policy, for example. The email notification and policy tip explain why content conflicts with a DLP policy. If you choose the email notification and policy tip can allow users to override a rule by reporting a false positive or providing a business justification, in an example. This can help you to educate your users about your DLP policies and enforce them without preventing people from doing their work. That's a quite important task. Also, what you help the user is he gets informed, hey, I'm really doing something on sensitive content. Is it the correct recipient? Is it the correct material I can send over? Do I comply with my regulations or with NDAs or any other things? So this is really a great way to give you the chance to inform and train your users and to get more acceptance from them and to get a better DLP strategy implemented in your organization. So information about overrides and false positive is also logged for reporting, and it's included in the incident reports, so that your compliance officer or you, as you do the work itself, you can regularly review this information and provide justification of your policies, of your whole life cycle of this DLP infrastructure. When a rule is matched, you can send an incident report to your compliance officer or any other people you choose with details of the event itself. This report includes information about the item that was matched, the actual content that matched the rule, and the name of the person who last modified the content. For email messages, the report also includes an attachment of the original message that matches a DLP policy. So really keep in mind what you get from the user or from the information, and that you don't violate any other regulations in your organization, because as you see in the figure, you have really the capability to send over this information to you, to anyone. You see the name of the person who have last modified the content. the content that match and specifically the rule, and including the surrounding text. So really keep in mind the sensible way to go with this information. Really keep that in mind. Another important topic inside of DLP policies is grouping and the logical operators. So often your DLP policy has a straightforward requirement, such as to identify all the content that contains a US social security number, for example. However, in other scenarios, your DLP policy might need to identify more loosely defined data. Let's make an example about the US Health Insurance Act, HIPAA, where you need to look for is content that contains specific types of sensitive information, such as a US Social Security number or Drug Enforcement Agency DEA number, and content that's more difficult to identify, such as communications about a patient's care or descriptions of medical services that are provided in that case. Identifying this content requires matching keywords from very large keyword lists, such as the International Classification of Diseases, ICD-9-CM or ICD-10-CM. You can easily identify such loosely defined data by using grouping and logical operators and or. When you create a DLP policy, you can do the following things. You can group sensitive information types, or you can choose the logical operator between the sensitive information types between or within a group and between the groups themselves. So choosing the operator within a group gives you the capability to say, okay, any of these or all of this, and helps you to build up a real great work with your rule set itself. Also, on the other hand, you can put it under grouping to put things together, and that's a really quite powerful topic. So between the groups, you can choose whether the conditions in just one group or all of the groups must be satisfied for the content to match the rule. So, for example, the built-in US HIPAA policy has a rule that uses an AND operator between the groups, so that it identifies content that contains the following information. From the group PII identifiers, at least one social security number or DA number, and on the other hand, from the group medical terms, at least one ICD-9-CM keyword or ICD-10-CM keyword. That's very clear and very conform to do that. So let's dig a little deeper into the priorities which are used in rules and how they are processed. So when you create rules in a policy, each rule is assigned a priority in the order in which it's created. That means the following: the rule created first has the first priority, the rule created second has the second priority, and so on. So after you have set more than one DLP policy, you can change the priorities of one or more policies. To do that, select the policy, choose edit the policy, and use the priority lists to specify its priority. When the content is evaluated against rules, the rules are processed in the priority order as mentioned. If content matches multiple rules, the rules are processed in priority order and the most restrictive action is enforced. Let's assume the following example. Rule 1 only notifies users. Rule 2 notifies users, restricts access and allows user overrides. Rule 3 notifies users, restricts access and does not allow users overrides. Rule 4 only notifies users. Rule 5 restricts access. Rule 6 notifies users, restricts access and does not allow user overrides. So in this example, if content matches all of the following rules, Rule 3 is enforced because it's the highest priority and the most restrictive rule. So in this example, note that matches for all of the rules are recorded in the audit logs and shown in the DLP reports, even though only the most restrictive rule is enforced. Regarding policy tips, note the following. Only the policy tip from the highest priority, most restrictive rule will be shown. For example, a policy tip from a rule that blocks access to the content will be shown over a policy tip from a rule that simply sends a notification. This prevents people from seeing a cascade of policy tips. If the policy tips in the most restrictive rule allow people to override the rule, then overriding this rule also overrides any other rules that the content matched. The next important point is how we can tune rules to make them easier or harder to match. After create and turn on DLP policies, sometimes you run into issues. For example, too much content that is not sensitive information matches the rules, or in other words, too many false positives. On the other side, too little content that is sensitive information matches the rules, or in other words, the protective actions aren't being enforced on the sensitive information. To address such issues, you can tune your rules by adjusting the instance count and match accuracy to make it harder or easier for content to match the rules. Because each sensitive information type used in a rule has both an instance count and a match accuracy. Let's talk about the instance count. Instance count means simply how many occurrences of a specific type of sensitive information must be present for content to match the rule. In an example, content matches the rule shown below if between 1 and 9 unique US or UK passport numbers identified. Note that the instance count includes only unique matches for sensitive information types and keywords. For example, if an email contains 10 occurrences of the same credit card number, those 10 occurrences count as a single instance of a credit card number. To use instance count to tune rules, the guidance is really straightforward. To make the rule easier to match, decrease the min count and or increase the max count value. You can also set max to any by deleting the numerical value in the configuration. The other way is to make the rule harder to match, you increase the minimum account. So typically you use less restrictive actions such as sending user notifications in a rule with a lower instance count, for example 1 to 9, and you use more restrictive actions on a higher instance count, for example 10 to any. On the other hand, we have the match accuracy. So, as already described, a sensitive information type is defined and detected by using a combination of different types of evidence. Commonly, a sensitive information type is defined by multiple such combinations called patterns. A pattern that requires less evidence has a lower match accuracy or confidence level, while a pattern that requires more evidence has a higher match accuracy or confidence level. So for example, the sensitive information type named credit card number is defined by two patterns. A pattern with 65% confidence that requires a number in the format of a credit card number, a number that passes the checksum itself, and a pattern with 85% confidence that requires a number in the format of the credit card number, a number that passes the checksum, a keyword, or an expiration date in the right format. So you can use these confidence levels or match accuracy in your rules. Typically you use less restrictive actions such as sending user notifications in the rule, lower match accuracy, and use more restrictive actions such as restricting access to content without allowing user overrides in a rule with a higher match accuracy. It's very important to understand that when a specific type of sensitive information, such as a credit card number, is identified in the content, only a single confidence level is returned. So if all the matches are for a single pattern, the confidence level for that pattern is returned. If there are matches for more than one pattern, that is, there are matches with two different confidence levels, a confidence level higher than any of the single patterns alone is returned. So this is the tricky part. For example, for a credit card, if both the 65% and 85 patterns are matched, the confidence level returned for the sensitive information type is greater than 90%, because more evidence means more confidence in that case. So if you want to create two mutually exclusive rules for credit cards, one for 65% match accuracy and one for 85% match accuracy, the ranges for the match accuracy would look like the following example. So the first rule picks up only matches of 65 patterns, and the second rule picks up the matches with at least one 85% match and can potentially have other lower confidence matches. For these reasons, we have the following guidance. The lowest confidence level typically uses the same value for min and max, not a range. The highest confidence level is typically a range from just above the lower confidence level to 100. And last but not least, any in-between confidence levels typically range from just above the lower confidence level to just below the higher confidence level in that part. We also can use labels as a condition in a DLP policy. You can create a label and then you can do the following two things. You can publish it so the end users can see and manually apply the label to the content, or you choose the other option, the auto-apply to the content that matches the conditions that you choose in that case. So after you create a label, you can use the label as a condition in your DLP policy as well, as mentioned. So let's do an example. You published a label named confidential, so the people in your organization can manually apply the label to confidential email and documents. By using this label as a condition in your DLP policy, you can restrict content labeled confidential from being shared with people outside your organization. Or you created a label named Doctor's House for a project of that name, and then applied that label automatically to content containing the keywords Documents House. By using this label as a condition in your DLP policy, you can show a policy tip to end users when they are about to share this content with someone outside your organization, for example. Or you published a label named Tax Record, so that your records manager can manually apply the label to content that needs to be classified as a record. By using this label as a condition in your DLP policy, you can look for content with this label along with other types of sensitive information such as ITINs or social security numbers to apply protection actions to content labeled tax records and get detailed activity reports about the DLP policy from the DLP reports and audit log data. On the other hand, you published, for example, a label named Executive Team Sensitive to the Exchange mailboxes and OneDrive accounts of the group of executives. By using this label as a condition in your DLP policy, you can enforce, for example, both retention and protection actions on the same subset of the content and user types. By using labels as a condition in your DLP rules, you can selectively enforce protection actions on a specific set of content, locations or users. When you create a DLP policy, you'll choose between simple or advanced settings. So what's the difference? Simple settings make it easy to create the most common type of DLP policy without using the rule editor itself. to create or modify rules. Advanced settings use the rule editor to give you a complete control over every setting for your DLP policy. So don't worry, under the covers simple settings and advanced settings work exactly the same. By enforcing rules comprised of conditions and actions, only with simple settings you don't see the rule editor. It's a quick way to create a DLP policy. So by far the most common DLP scenario is creating a policy to help protect content containing sensitive information from being shared with people outside your organization, and taking an automatic remediating action such as restricting who can access the content, sending end user or admin notifications, and auditing the event for later investigation. People use DLP to help prevent the inadvertent disclosure of sensitive information. To simplify achieving this goal, when you create a DLP policy, you can choose just use the simple settings. The settings provide everything you need to implement the most common DLP policy without having to go into the rule editor. But if you need to create a more customized DLP policy, you can choose the advanced settings. The advanced settings present you with the rule editor, where you have full control over every possible option, as already mentioned, including the instance count and match accuracy, what we had before, the specific confidence level for each rule. Next we will go through the DLP Policy Templates. The first step in creating a DLP policy is choosing what information to protect. So by starting with a DLP template, you save the work of building a new set of rules from scratch and figuring out which types of information should be included by default. You can then add to or modify these requirements to fine-tune the rule to meet your organization's specific requirements, what you want to avoid or what you want to do with. A pre-configured DLP policy template can help you to detect specific types of sensitive information, such as HIPAA data, PCI DSS data, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act data, or even local specific personally identifiable information. To make it easy for you to find and protect common types of sensitive information, the policy templates included in Microsoft 365 already contain the most common sensitive information types that you need to get started. But your organization may also have its own specific requirements, and in this case you can create a DLP policy from scratch by choosing the custom policy option. A custom policy is by default empty and contains no pre-made rules, and you are completely free to define your rule work. A very important tip from the field is that you roll out your DLP policies with the test mode. So when you create your DLP policies, you really should consider rolling them out gradually to assess the impact and test their effectiveness before you fully enforce them. For example, you don't want a new DLP policy to unintentionally block access to thousands of documents that people require access in order to get their work done today. So as a big requirement, really use this test mode, and you have really great capabilities to work with. So if you create DLP policies with a large potential impact, I always recommend the following sequence. Start in test mode without policy tips, and then use the DLP reports and any incident reports to assess the impact itself. So you can use the DLP reports to view the number, the location, type, severity of policy matches. So based on these results, you can fine-tune the rules as needed for your environment and your organization. In test modes, DLP policies will not impact the productivity of people working in your organization, and you don't disturb them in the day they need to get done this day. On the next Second way is to move to test mode with the notifications and policy tips, so that you can begin to educate your users about your compliance policies and prepare them for the rules that are going to be applied. At this stage, you can also ask users to report false positives, so that you can further refine your rules and make it available in a granular way and with a higher maturity. And this is a quite important process. Really take your time to be on this step to gather as much information as you can. The third option is to go to the full enforcement on the policies, so that the actions in the rules are applied and the contents protected. Keep in mind, don't stop monitoring the DLP reports and the incident reports, because you gather a lot of great information about that, and you can always refine your rules for the future and for a higher maturity of your complete ecosystem. Until now we heard a lot about DLP policies, and now we want to take a close look at how DLP policies work. So, as we already know, DLP detects sensitive information by using a deep content analysis, not just a simple text scan. This deep content analysis uses keyword matches, dictionary matches, the evaluation of regular expressions, internal functions and other methods to detect content that matches your DLP policies. So potentially only a small percentage of your data is considered sensitive. A DLP policy can identify, monitor and automatically protect just the data without impeding or affecting people who work with the rest of your content. Basically, policies are synced. After you create a DLP policy in the Security and Compliance Center, it's stored in a central policy store and then synced to the various content sources, including, as we already heard, Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, Office desktop programs, Microsoft Teams. So after the policy is synced to the right locations, it starts to evaluate the content and enforce the actions. The policy evaluation in OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online sites is specific, because across all of your SharePoint Online sites and OneDrive for Business sites, documents are constantly changing. They are continually being created, edited, shared, and so on. This means documents can conflict or become compliant with a DLP policy at any time. For example, a person can upload a document that contains no sensitive information to their team site, but later a different person can edit the same document and add sensitive information to it. Exactly for this reason, DLP policies check documents for policy matches frequently in the background. You can think of this as asynchronous policy evaluation. As people add or change documents in the sites, the search engine scans the content so that you can search for it later. While this is happening, the contents also scan for sensitive information and to check if it's shared. Any sensitive information that's basically found is stored securely in the search index, though that only the compliance team can access it, but not a typical user. Each DLP policy that you have turned on runs in the background asynchronously, checking search frequently for any content that matches a policy and applying the correct actions to protect it from inadvertent leaks. So finally, documents can conflict with a DLP policy, as we already mentioned, but they can also become compliant with a DLP policy, because if a person adds credit numbers to a document, it might cause a DLP policy to block access to the document automatically. But if the person later removes the sensitive information, the action in this case, as I mentioned, blocking, is automatically undone the next time the document is evaluating against the policy. DLP itself evaluates any content that can be indexed. The policy evaluation in Exchange Online, Outlook and Outlook on the web is if you create a DLP policy that includes Exchange Online as a location, the policy synced from the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center to Exchange Online. And then from Exchange Online to Outlook and Outlook on the web. So when a message is being composed in Outlook, the user can see policy tips as the content being created is evaluated against the DLP policies. After a message is sent, it's evaluated against DLP policy as a normal part of the mail flow, along with the Exchange mail flow rules, also known as transport rules. And DLP policies created in the Exchange Admin Center, as you know it already as an Exchange administrator, or if you already was working with this technology in the past. DLP policies can scan both the message and any attachment. The policy evaluation in Office desktop programs like Excel, PowerPoint and Word includes exactly the same capabilities to identify this sensitive information and apply DLP policies, as we already heard about SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. The Office programs sync the DLP policies directly from the central policy store and then continuously evaluate the content against the DLP policies when specifically people work with documents opened from a site that's included in the DLP policy. Basically, the DLP policy evaluation in Office is designed not to affect the performance of the programs or the productivity of people working on the content itself. If they're working on a really large document or the user's computer is busy, it may take a few seconds for a policy to appear. The new thing in Microsoft Teams right now, how it works there. The policy is synced from the Office 365 Security Compliance Center to user account and the Microsoft Teams channels and chat messages. So depending on how DLP policies are configured from your side, when someone attempts to share sensitive information in a Microsoft Teams chat or channel message, the message can be blocked or revoked. And documents that contain sensitive information and that are shared with guests called external users won't open for these users. There's a specific part about Microsoft Teams. Specifically in this slide we see exactly this example about the data loss prevention in the Microsoft Teams application. So you see the policy tips that can help and educate your users, like you have seen here, that the message was blocked or this message was blocked due to sensitive content. And on the right side you see exactly the part of that. So your message was blocked because of it contains the following sensitive data: social security numbers, ICD-10 or ICD-9 CM information. And here it's what you can do right now. You can provide, for example, an override and send it, or report this to the admin and to say, hey, really you're wrong because this information doesn't contain any sensitive information. Please use these activities because this gives you really a great and good insight into the processes you need to handle. To add Microsoft Teams as a location to existing DLP policies, you need to have the correct assigned role that has the permission to edit the DLP policies. You can go to the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, it's short called https://protection.office.com, and sign in. Choose your data loss prevention parts, the policy. Select the policy, look for the values and specific the locations. And if you see Teams chat and channel messages, you are really all set. If you don't do that or you don't see that, just click the edit button and add the Teams chat and channel messages to it. It's a quite easy moving forward or straightforward process to edit or to add this location. Another quick note is to get started with the default DLP policies, because before you even create your first data loss prevention policy, DLP is already helping you out to protect your sensitive information with a specific default policy. This default policy and its recommendations help you to keep your sensitive content secure by notifying you when email or documents containing a credit card number were shared with someone outside of your organization. You see this specific recommendation on the homepage of the Security and Compliance Center. You can use the widget to quickly view when and how much sensitive information was shared, and then refine the default DLP policy in just a few clicks. That's quite an important information and note on that. We shouldn't forget that you also can view the report of this default DLP policy, and what helps you to refine the default DLP policy. Be aware that the detailed report shows you when and how much content containing credit card numbers was shared in the past 30 days. Note that the rule matches can take up to 48 hours to show up in the widget itself. To help you protect sensitive information, the default policy does the following. It detects when content in all the locations what we already have discussed are matched, and at least one credit card number is shared with people outside of your organization. It shows basically policy tips and sends email notifications to the users when they attempt to share this sensitive information with people outside of the organization. And it generates detailed activity reports so that you can track things like who shared the content with people outside your organization and when they did it.
In the next demonstration, I will show you how you can create a DLP policy, how you can work with that, for example with PII information or credit card information, whatever, that you get an idea how you can work with DLP policies itself.
Now we come to the data loss prevention topic. We just go through the compliance center here inside of the Microsoft 365 world. We go to data loss prevention and we take a closer look to the policies. I provided just two examples here in that case for US financial data, and on the other hand for a general data protection regulation for a GDPR topic. As we can see here, and we can edit the policy here in this part to see all the different settings included in that. So I think the description is very clear. So we see the locations. We have now the option to go through Exchange content, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Teams chat and channel messages, and we can include devices as well, and the Microsoft Cloud App Security Suite, including obviously specific topics and selections here in that case. What I do here, I have some base rules about the conditions with a low volume and with a high volume to have an accurate setting of identification. And I see here the credit card numbers, US bank account numbers with an accuracy and an instance count from 1 to 9. And it depends, this rule, when the content is shared with people inside my organization. And I restrict here the access or encrypt the content in Microsoft 365 locations, block users from accessing shared SharePoint content and so on. And I put in user notifications inside of this specific scenario. I can use policy tips. I can also start with training the users, not affecting any data. That's a great option of these policies. Also alerts, sending, and additional options inside of this topic.
So that's basically the first part of the rule, the low volume topic, and then the high volume topic, an instance count of 10, so that I have a really great identification topic to see and check all of these business topics here. That's one example what we can build up in rules, and we can turn it right now on. We keep it off, or we make a test, and we include policy tips for the user that he's going to be trained inside of the scenario. Basically that's always the same point here. I just go inside of that rule set for GDPR now. I think you can imagine what's the big difference right now here in that case. That, for example, I use the same locations, and I have now the sensitive content that is found here built on the patterns. I can go on exact data matches. I can include also forms. I can include different mechanisms to identify really the sensitive content in my environment, and that's a great option to go for inside of this. You have this previews, these alerts, which allows you to have here. I don't have this in the point here. And I have the Endpoint DLP settings, that's specifically for Windows devices, where I can say, okay, I want files in these locations that won't be monitored as exclusions. I can define unallowed applications, and I can define browser and domain restrictions to sensitive data, which browsers are not allowed, and so on, and which service domains are not included inside of this topic. Obviously, I can integrate all these topics, the sensitive info types, to bring that up and running and define my own specific info types for detecting specific content to work on the specific parts inside of this things here. And I also get the Content Explorer, where I directly see where are the files, where can I find specific topics here which matches all this information from the content perspective. And I also get the Activity Explorer, what was happening inside of my infrastructure, to see all the results, and later on in data classification and data protection inside of this part.
Now, after talking a lot about data leakage prevention or the data loss prevention features, including DLP policies in Microsoft 365, we will hand over to the Azure Information Protection section to describe all the important stuff about this technology to classify, label, protect, and track your sensitive information.
Let's talk a bit about Azure Information Protection policies.
Azure Information Protection, short called AIP, is a cloud-based solution that can help organizations to protect sensitive information by classifying and optionally encrypting documents and emails with RMS on Windows, Mac, and mobile devices, for example.
Azure Information Protection basically comes with a default policy which contains 5 main labels. 2 of these labels contain sub-labels to provide subcategories when needed. It gives you really a great example, and Microsoft have done a great testing about identifying different labels and all of that stuff. So when a label basically is configured for sub-labels, user cannot select the main label but must select one of the sub-labels. So in this scenario, the main label is supported as a display container only for the name and the color. The Azure Information Protection labels also can be used with the full range of data that an organization typically creates and stores. So from the lowest classification of personal data to the highest classification of highly confidential data. Obviously you can use the default labels without changes, or you can customize them, or you can delete them, and you can create new labels for your specific needs inside of your instructions. So you have also different functionality between that, or inside of that. You can provide labels automatically. You can do that manually. You can combine that. You make recommendations, for example. And you can use labels to classify and optionally protect your documents with Azure Rights Management, and to use also the track and control feature to analyze the data flows and you can do the track document access. All of that stuff is included in the Azure Information Protection policy itself.
With the usage of Azure Information Protection labels, we can apply classifications to documents and emails. When we do this, the classification is identifiable regardless of where the data is stored or with whom it's shared. The labels can include visual markings such as header, footer, or watermarks, and metadata is added to files and email headers in clear text. The clear text ensures that other services such as data loss prevention solutions can identify this classification and take the appropriate action. For example, the following email message has been classified as general, and the label has added a footer of sensitive column general to the email message itself. This footer is a visual indicator for all recipients that it's intended for general business data that should not be sent outside the organization in this taxonomy. The label is also embedded in the email headers so that email services can inspect this value and can create an audit entry or prevent it to being sent outside the organization. It's quite important to understand the concept how the data is protected. The protection technology in specific uses the Azure Rights Management service. It's also called Azure RMS in the most of the time. This technology is integrated with other Microsoft cloud services and applications such as Office 365 and Azure Active Directory. It can also be used with your own line of business applications and information protection solutions from any other software vendors, whether these specific applications and solutions are on-premise or in the cloud. Obviously there is the older RMS component that was built on the server system itself. This can also be used in specific scenarios like in hold your own key, what we discuss later. The protection technology uses in specifically encryption, identity and authorization policies. Similarly to the labels that are applied, protection that is applied by using rights management stays with the documents and emails and is independently of any location inside or outside your organization, networks, file servers and applications. The information protection solution keeps you in control of your data, so even when it's shared with other people in different countries or whatever. So let's do an example. You can configure a report document or a sales forecast spreadsheet so that it can be accessed only by people in your organization and control whether the document can be edited or restricted to read only or prevent it from being printed. You can configure emails similarly and also prevent them from being forwarded or prevent the use of the reply all option, for example. These protection settings can be part of your label configuration so that users both classify and protect documents and emails simply by applying a label. However, the same protection settings can also be used by applications and services that support protection but not labeling. For these applications and services, the protection settings become available as rights management templates. As soon as the Azure Rights Management service is activated, 2 default templates are available for you that restrict data access to users within your organization. You can use specifically these templates to immediately help prevent data leaking from your organization. You can also supplement these default templates by configuring your own protection settings that apply more restrictive controls, for example. When you create a label for Azure Information Protection that includes protection settings under the covers, this action creates a corresponding rights management template. And you can then additionally use the template with applications and services that support the Azure Rights Management solution. As we see in the following example, Azure Information Protection integrates very well into the end user's existing workflows. There are two clients available in the moment. This is the Azure Information Protection client and the Unified Labeling client. We have also two different places to administer our Azure Information Protection solution actually. One is the Azure portal and the other one is the Office 365 Security Compliance Center, where we can do the configuration of Azure Information Protection. In this example we see the version of the Unified Labeling client that is well integrated into the Office suite completely, and Microsoft actually transforms from the Azure Information Protection client to the Unified Labeling client. This is the strategy. I recommend you to read about this scenario and how you can transform from one to the other one and which features are available in the different scenarios. There's a great guide out of the Microsoft product team that gives you a guidance how to implement Azure Information Protection. This is a really great resource that gives you all the necessary information of the different types and what you can do with which client enabled on your environment. In the next example we can see how we can create a new template for using the RMS protection inside of our Azure Information Protection strategy. First we need to understand how it works correctly. So we generate first of all a label. For example, it's confidential, high security, or whatever you call it. And on the other hand, you want to use to this label, to this classification label, the protection from the Azure RMS infrastructure. As we heard already, there's built on templates or on custom permissions. There's another functionality that's also included into the feature set of the Azure Information Protection scenarios right now. But let's talk now about the template. The template basically defines which rights for which user or for which group will be applied to a document or to an email. And on the other hand, we can see that's written here, Azure Cloud Key, the protection. So there are different key scenarios where your encryption keys or key material is stored. In that example, what we see right now is it's stored on the cloud itself. So it's the standard key scenario, key material scenario, what is used here. Basically, so a shared key that will be used from Microsoft 365 or from the Azure Information Protection platform. There's another key set that you can also use for it. It's called Bring Your Own Key. In this scenario, you create a key material on-prem on your site. It can be a soft version, so you install an ADRMS instance on your infrastructure, create the key set on a software base, or you use a hardware security module to create the key pair exactly for this scenario and bring up a copy into the service, and then you can use your own keys in the Azure Information Protection. Another scenario what we want to go through later on is the hold your own key scenario. There you provide a local ADRMS infrastructure with template, and you build up here a reference to exactly this template and the entry points that are needed for the RMS infrastructure. So you can use different key materials to protect your information through a template. And this is the main concept of Azure RMS and the integration into Azure Information Protection, as you can see here in this example. To get a better understanding, we take a look at what is the Azure Rights Management offering itself.
because this is a cloud-based protection service that uses encryption, identity, and authorization policies to help you to secure your files and emails. And it works specifically, as you see in the architecture overview, across multiple devices, phones, tablets, and PCs. And it can work really in different scenarios, in cloud-only scenarios, hybrid scenarios. This is a well-implemented feature set. As you see, maybe the legacy product on-premises is the Azure Active Directory Rights Management Service. That's just an on-premise service that you also can use for on-premise scenarios as well. But it's highly recommended to really go through the Azure Rights Management capabilities, because only in the cloud is the labeling and classification scenario available. Let's do an example of what we can really do. For example, employees might email a document to a partner company or save a document to their cloud drive, and they want to protect it. The persistent protection that Azure RMS provides not only helps to secure this company data, but might also be legally mandated for compliance, legal discovery requirements, or simply for good information management practices. But very important on this part is that authorized people and services such as search and indexing can continue to read and inspect the protected data. This capability is not easily accomplished with other information protection solutions that use peer-to-peer encryption. Maybe you have heard about this capability referred to as reasoning over data, and it is a crucial element in maintaining control of your organization's data. The picture shows how the Office 365 platform uses this Azure RMS infrastructure for their needs. It's a well-integrated scenario that Azure RMS provides his service for hybrid environment, for cloud only, or for an on-premise integration. So it works over the popular platforms: Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Windows phones. It works closely together in a hybrid scenario with the users of your locally Active Directory, and it can provide protection capabilities to your local file services, Exchange servers, or SharePoint servers. And this makes it to a really great capability and to work with. Now that we have heard a little bit about the Azure Rights Management component, the protection component in the Azure Information Protection solution, we come back to the default labels or the default classification taxonomy that is available with Azure Information Protection. Because when an administrator first connects to the Azure Information Protection service by using the Azure portal, the Azure Information Protection default policy for the tenant is created. Occasionally Microsoft made changes to this default policy, but if you were already using the service before, the default policy was revised. Your earlier version of the Azure Information Protection default policy is not updated because you might have configured it and deployed it into production. So as you can see here, we have different parts of it: confidential all employees, confidential recipient only, confidential all employees, and confidential high confidential recipient only. But keep in mind, when deciding on a classification taxonomy, I recommend keeping the following in mind. The classification taxonomy should identify the confidentiality level of the information. Based on the confidentiality level, you can later decide what protection measures will be applied for each label document. A recommended classification taxonomy is one that every information worker in your organization will be able to order from least restrictive to most restrictive without any doubt. Some organizations, also Microsoft, during the pilot, adopted an internal label as part of their taxonomy. The information was not encrypted and thus can't be shared with external recipients. The term internal is not a confidentiality level and could cause confusion with information workers. Microsoft and many other organizations have changed this classification to be called general. The description stayed roughly the same, but without the expectation that the data would only be accessible by internal users. Also, I may recommend a taxonomy that is slightly different from the current one approved by your organization. Microsoft understands that changing the approved classification taxonomy is a task that might take time and start the project, but in such cases you should configure the current approved classification taxonomy and collect feedback from workers after the deployment. And the following things are integrated right now. This is personal, that means non-business data which does not belong to the company. Data is not encrypted and cannot be tracked or revoked. Do not use this to classify any personal data which is collected by or which belongs to the company itself. Such content, for example, should be classified as either confidential or highly confidential. I also see this taxonomy specifically if it's allowed to use the computer or environment to really create personal content itself. If you don't need, you can also remove this label itself. Public, for example, is be used for business data specifically prepared and approved for public consumption. Maybe the marketing approval or anything else. The specific is here that the data is not encrypted and the owners cannot track or revoke the content using Azure Information Protection. General, as we already heard, is to be used for business data which is not meant for public consumption. However, this can be shared with internal employees, business guests and external partners as needed. And specifically the data is not encrypted and the owners cannot track or revoke content using the Azure Information Protection. As we've seen in the example in the slide, we have the confidential that is specifically used on sensitive business data which could cause business harm if it's overshared, for example. Recipients specifically are trusted and get full delegation rights with this template, including the ability to remove the encryption. The data is protected using Azure Information Protection and the owners can track and revoke the access. The last label in the taxonomy is the highly confidential. This is basically used on a very sensitive business data which would certainly causes business harm if it's overshared specifically. Recipients do not get delegation rights or rights to modify or remove the encryption in this example. And the data is protected using Azure Information Protection and owners can track and revoke the access. So you see there is a lot of things you need to see on top of the default Azure Information Protection policy. But take the time and use the defaults and start with them, do your learnings and go ahead to implement the solution itself. As you can see here in this slide, you can basically configure the policy settings for Azure Information Protection through the Azure portal or in another way with the unified labeling strategy of Microsoft over the Office 365 portal. I highly recommend you for the exam that you really see the differences between the both strategies that Microsoft runs actually on that. On this slide you see and specifically how you can provide specific policies to your users. There is the capability to also scope policies to a specific set of users that maybe have additional labels they need to work with, and you can do the whole stuff here in the portal itself. What you can do here is you can say what's the auditing level, is a watermark presented, is a justification available, and in which applications which stuff is visible. That's a quite important thing to configure your user experience on the client side itself. So try to go through the portal and play around with the different options and to prepare yourself for the exam. To get a bit more details of the Azure Information Policies, you have the capabilities obviously to add, delete or reorder your labels for Azure Information Protection. So you have the capability to provide sub-labels to a label itself, like confidential, a team beyond confidential, for example, confidential finance, confidential all employees, whatever. Or you can use, for example, secret with a sub-label that is just for executives or whatever, to define specific control mechanisms for the information that is labeled and protected with this label itself. You also can reorder the information protection labels so that you can show it to the user in a specific way and to build up the specific sensitivity levels in this order. As we heard before, there are three main scenarios for the key material for the protection or the encryption mechanism. The first one is the Microsoft managed key material that's shared in the service. The second one is the bring your own key scenario, and the third one is the hold your own key scenario. And specifically, you have a customer managed key, or a bring your own or hold your own key scenario if you have higher compliance regularities or obligations you need to meet. So certain compliance requirements may be driving overall the security needs, such as where the keys can go, how the keys are managed, and who can operate on the keys. For example, in some regions, customers have regulatory obligations that state the need to have certain key arrangements with their cloud service provider. Even more common, certain large organizations have hardware security modules or hardware and other processes in place to manage their key material. Therefore, they may be looking to extend this into the cloud, and for these customers, customer managed keys are offered in Microsoft 365 and in the Azure Information Protection platform. So it allows really to remove the access for Microsoft later. If you revoke the keys, the key material, you also revoke the access to all the data that was encrypted with this key material. This is one of the main things why you can go through this scenario and to bring your own key in that scenario. So what we need to take a look on it is what's the difference or what's the versus between the cloud-based protection and the hold your own key. As I already mentioned before, with hold your own key you need to provide your own on-premises AD RMS infrastructure with their own key material. Because it's based on templates, and you define in the label a specific template that is hosted on your local AD RMS infrastructure. So obviously a main benefits to go to a cloud-based protection approach is that we don't need to have a server infrastructure that is required. Makes it the solution quicker, most cost-effective to deploy and maintain than an on-premises solution. So I see in my practical world the hold your own key for really high sensitive content that is used, and most of the customers use the Microsoft managed keys or the bring your own key scenario. The other thing is that cloud-based protection provides an easier sharing method with partners and users from other organizations with the cloud-based authentication. This is related to the B2B process that Microsoft provides with Azure Active Directory for guest users. So you have all great opportunity to work directly in a federated scenario without providing all the technical requirements for that. The other thing is the better integration with other Azure and Microsoft 365 services, such as web viewers, pivoted views, anti-malware integration, e-discovery and DLP, for example. On the other hand, what you get with the cloud-based approach is the document tracking, revocation and the email notification functionality for sensitive documents that have shared. The local ADRMS infrastructure is not able to provide an equivalent feature set for this reason. So what we can say about hold your own key guidance and best practices. First of all, in the meta level, really look like your requirements. Do you really have a requirement for hold your own key? This is the main question you should ask yourself. On the other side, use hold your own key protection really just for the documents and emails that require this encryption level to be isolated from the cloud itself. On the other hand, hold your own key protection really doesn't provide the listed benefits, as I already mentioned before. So about the tracking, about the revoking feature sets and all of that stuff. And on the other hand, the phrase means that only on-premises applications and services will be able to open hold your own key protected data in your environment. Cloud-based services and applications cannot reason over the hold your own key protected data. And really, as I said, really think, do you really need a hold your own key scenario in your environment? After discussing a few things about label taxonomy, protection, key strategies, we come to the integration to scan and discover your information on different places. For this reason, Microsoft implemented the Azure Information Protection Scanner that allows you to scan on local file shares and SharePoint servers. Obviously, it is not allowing only to scan, it allows also to apply automatically, for example, labels and the protection over the Azure Information Protection and Rights Management integration. That's a great stuff. You can install it on connector-based scenario on a local server, and you can scan and work with SMB, HTTP and HTTPS against your file services and your SharePoint server. That's a great tool set of it. Please keep in mind there's another tool. This is the Rights Management Connector. This is a different thing. This allows in a dedicated way on-premises services like file server, SharePoint and Exchange servers to consume Azure RMS templates for protecting information.
Let's focus on the scanning process for existing content, data at rest to classify and protect. We have both scenarios. We have the on-premises storage, where we can use the Azure Information Protection Scanner to discover, classify, and protect documents on network shares and Microsoft SharePoint server sites and libraries. Then we have the cloud data storage. For this scenario, we use Microsoft Cloud App Security, for example, to apply labels into documents in Box, SharePoint, OneDrive, all of that stuff that's available in that case. So the on-premise part is built really on the Azure Information Protection Scanner. Don't mix it up with the RMS connector that's also in place. The RMS connector is also capable to use it in SharePoint and Exchange on-prem, on file servers on-prem, but it delivers just the encryption, the Azure RMS component. So if we talk really about classify, label and protect strategies, we need to go through the Azure Information Protection Scanner. So the Azure Information Protection Scanner is also not built for Azure File Services or something like that. That's part of the cloud story that you need to use there in that case. In the next demonstration, I will show you how you can use Azure Information Protection for classification, labeling, protecting and reporting capabilities that you get an idea about this function set.
In this demonstration, I will show short about the Azure Information Protection. You see directly the new settings
in the unified labeling option. So you see here the different labels that are available inside of my infrastructure that can be used. This is the default set here in this case. Obviously I can create a label and integrate that in a label policy and define an auto labeling strategy inside of my infrastructure. So that's basically the unified labeling approach, and I have this already prepared. So I have here this sensitive video product, which is pointing to a SharePoint location where highly confidential all employees is the automatic labeling process in a Teams environment, for example, which I can use here, and I simulate it and I can work with that as well. That's a great option. Basically, just to mention that, I have also portalazure.com. That's the classic, what's in the sunset actually, this feature set. But just to complete all the settings together, if I want to go here, I have the classic administration and service here in that place, where I get all the informations, all the same labeling, and the sunset information also as well of this strategy. So you see here the different label sets what are included inside of my infrastructure. Also I see the usage report, what's happening on my infrastructure, like labels by application, File Explorer, Word, which labels was being used, which activities, what's happening. That's my CEO what's working on the different documents. You see here also included PDF documents, which is supported. Data discovery, you see also the endpoints that is bringing up from the endpoint. This data comes from Defender for Endpoint, for example. And I also can include obviously scanner information inside of these topics. See also the labels, all of that things here. Keep in mind that the standard or the classic client is not available actually to download. So really think about really moving to the unified labeling approach to administer all the stuff here in this case. Let's jump directly to the client. So what we have here integrated is just open a Word document, create a new one, do some very important text here inside of this case. So I have here this label sets. You see here the sensitivity bar as well. You see right now on this topic that the agent is installed, the client, unified labeling client. So it's not the pure Microsoft 365 application integration. This you need specifically if you want to have a functionality like you want to classify and protect here on the client itself, on the desktop. Specifically for Adobe, that's a necessary feature you need to have to use that, because Microsoft integrated all the other stuff into the Office suite itself. Here you see the information protection client. So what happening here is that I have this all employees, for example. Then what's happening in the background is that here is an associated template from the RMS perspective, so it's getting encrypted and protected by these topics. And you can now use all the different functionalities that is available here inside of the structure. All the RMS protection applies on this document specifically. Obviously you can have automatic scenarios on that, recommendation scenarios, what's the best approach in the beginning when you are not able to identify your documents or your context specifically in a great manner. To learn from your users to get additional context, that's always a great option to work with. Also start just with classifying first, and later on, if you have a real maturity in identifying your documents and automation processes, then apply your protection scenario. Here we see the integration in the Adobe suite. So we have also here the confidential all employees scenario. You will see as well the security settings and the permission details. So that's the native integration in Adobe. For example, you can have this as well for Foxit and other PDF reader writers. So that's a great way to have a good approach in place for all the different scenarios on that. Next point is that we have as well, if I jump here into classify and protect, I can directly view the permissions on this topic. I can change the label and have all these topics to that. The tracking of these operations and the document is coming up into the unified labeling strategy in the new previews. So it's coming back from the typical Azure Information Protection Classic client into the unified labeling. So this comes up that you also can track the information as a user. Let's take a short look on this side. What else is available? You have this section here on this case. I can also go to label analytics. That's my preview right now. And it combines the two views about retention labels and the sensitivity labels, and you can explore now the information, what was happening, and it's jumping back actually to the classic view to give you the information on the Azure Information Protection where I was before. This is also gonna be changed in the near future. On the other hand, what we have is, if we jump to compliance.microsoft.com, we have the other options to train our material to work with that topics. If we go here to the data classification section, you get more and more features about also this integrations, where what's happening on which things. Then the trainable classifiers to train material, to bring examples into the game, to define your sensitive info types, to integrate exact data matches, to analyze data and bring up specific patterns, to have a dynamic content integration and that stuff. And you get all the activities on this specific classification operations inside of this part.
A few slides before, I already mentioned the differences between the Azure Information Protection Scanner and the Azure Rights Management Connector. Now let's take a closer look to the Azure Rights Management Connector. This is a specific software tool you install on a server. It's called RMS Connector. You enter the credentials to authorize the servers to use the Azure RMS components. On the other hand, you authorize the servers like the file server, SharePoint servers, and the Exchange server to use the RMS connector for proxying to the Azure RMS service itself. You have also the capability to configure a load balancing or a high availability scenario that your rights management connector is high available and your protecting operations work through all the times. The RMS connector uses itself by default HTTP, but is highly recommended also to provide all the stuff over HTTPS. The RMS connector can also work over a web proxy, and it's capable to communicate with the Azure RMS server. To install the RMS connector topic, you need the RMS connector administration tool on your administrative computers to work with the toolset itself. Service or the RMS connector is actually supported with Windows Server 2016, 2012 R2, 2012. So see the current documentation if you need to have more information about that feature set to use Azure RMS for your local on-premises infrastructure to work without the labeling functionality. There are just a few pieces missing for this RMS connector, and specific which applications are supported actually by the RMS connector itself. So for Exchange, you can use Exchange 2016 and Exchange 2013. You can also use the Exchange 2010. but specifically on the client access service and hub transport service. You can use it for SharePoint, for the front-end SharePoint web servers, including those hosting the central administration server. Or you can use it in the form of integration for the file classification infrastructure, FCI, which based on Windows Server computers that have installed the file resource manager itself. So these are the components for which you can use the RMS Connector service itself. Basically, you can activate or to check the actual status of the rights management protection from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You can navigate to a rights management page on Settings, Services and Add-ins, Microsoft Azure Information Protection, and click the Manage Microsoft Azure Information Protection Settings point. On the rights management page, you will see it already in the state active, or you can click active or deactivate to do the several operations. So this is a typical option. You can do that for your tenant in specific. The next important feature is the RMS for individuals and Azure Information Protection. RMS for individuals is a free self-service subscription for users who need to open files that have been protected by Azure Information Protection. If these users cannot be authenticated by Azure Active Directory, this free sign-up service can create an account in Azure Active Directory for a user. As a result, these users can now authenticate by using their company email address and then read the protected files on computers or mobile devices. RMS for individuals uses Azure Active Directory self-service sign-up. So if users have created accounts for your organizations by using this subscription, as an administrator for your organization, you can claim the ownership and take control of their accounts. Just a side note, this free subscription is one option to help to ensure that authorized people outside your organization can always read files that your organization protects. Another option is to email documents by using the Office 365 message encryption with new capabilities. This email solution works for all email addresses and on all devices, and is the recommended way to safely share information and view Office documents in a browser with people outside your organization. That's really a great feature set and is used for external sharing scenarios.
Alright, we are on the end of day 3, where we have gone through the implementation of data loss prevention and sensitivity labels. Tomorrow we will go through the management of data governance and auditing and reporting. We manage the data governance, auditing, e-discovery, the security report and alerts, and we will have a specific discussion of preparing for the MS 101 exam itself.
So in the end, I want to remember you, go through the self-paced learning resources for MS 101 on the Microsoft Learning Platform and do all the labs, collect your experience and read about the different features on docs.microsoft.com. At the end of this module, give me the chance to give you a really great thank you that you do the journey with me, and I'm happy to see you tomorrow to gather more and more information about the last topics of this course. See you soon.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope our participants will really benefit from it. Also, as an additional resource, let me remind you that this series on Microsoft 365 Mobility and Security MS 101 will also be available for you to watch on demand at aka.ms/enablevts and aka.ms/training center. In fact, you can find more virtual training series available for your on-demand consumption there. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. Hope you enjoyed today's session. We'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.